The stage light seared my eyes as hot and unresponsive as the crowd. A short podium separated me from a row of stone-faced investors. My trembling hands gripped a printout of my novel's premise, a coming-of-age set in post-apartheid Johannesburg. It wasn't business or tech, it was my life in those pages. The silence twisted, growing thinner, sharper. I cleared my throat and tried again. The narrative echoes my generation's search. A young man in a crisp navy suit, the first judge, cut in. And how exactly is this a business? What is the commercial path? I blinked. I'd rehearsed my pitch so many times I'd started hearing my words in my sleep, but none of those inner judiciaries had sounded this cold. It's a novel. A book that... Our time is precious, said a woman with brilliant white braids, not unkindly but with tired finality. We're here for scalable returns. Laughter rumbled from the upper rows. I recognized the snicker. It belonged to my cousin SBU, up in the cheap seats with his friends, all university-bound on more traditional routes. The giggles curled around my ears, thin and cruel. In the little corner of the auditorium where my family sat, my mother's hands were folded tightly, eyes downcast, while my uncle nudged her and whispered behind his hand, "My time ran out." They called next, and I gathered my things and escaped out the side door, the laughter following me into the sunlit corridor. I wanted to punch the wall. Instead, I stuffed my notebook in my backpack and kept my fists jammed in my pockets, knuckles throbbing. The outside air in downtown Johannesburg was brittle and dry, heavy with traffic fumes and the promise of another sleepless, hungry night. I heard another burst of laughter behind me as a cluster of teens in expensive sneakers swarmed past. The humiliation stuck with me, an ache right under my ribs as I made the long walk back home. There was no bus fare left. I replayed their questions, rehearsed the answers I could have given, cursed every hesitation, every awkward word. My neighborhood on the outskirts of Alexandra was already humming with evening energy when I got back. Laundry lines shook in the breeze. The smells of pap and fried fish drifted from the open doors. Inside our flat, my mother didn't look up when I walked in. She sat at the table cutting wilted spinach, her bangles stacked together. The TV muttered in the background. "How did it go?" she asked, eyes never leaving her hands. I slumped into a chair. They laughed. I tried to sound resigned, angry, anything but defeated. She sliced faster, knuckles white. "You could still work at your uncle's shop. He's willing to forgive the last time." I bit back the urge to shout. My uncle's whisper, still playing at stories, echoed in my head. I stared at the scarred wooden table until she stopped waiting for a response. At dinner, Esbu's mother called to report on his college acceptance letter. "A real future," she kept saying loudly. I could hear SBU in the background. "Maybe Nomsa can write about it one day. Fiction." His laughter rocked through the receiver. My mother forced a smile. I went to bed fully clothed, replaying the investor pitch. I promised myself this would not be the last time I told my story. My days became rigid after that. I picked up shifts at a tuck shop 2 streets away, rising at dawn to serve customers shoulder to shoulder in the dim interior. I saved every rand, rationed every meal, and when I finished work I wrote longhand in battered exercise books. There was peace in the struggle. My anger became a pulse under the surface, pumping determination through my tired limbs. When the shop closed early one Friday for a funeral, I found myself in a queue outside the city library. An old woman, her cane wrapped in plastic, kept glancing at my notebook. "You study?" she asked, voice formal. "No, ma'am. I write stories. Real stories." I nodded, her mouth pressed thin. "Write something they remember. These streets, there are too many shadows nobody talks about." Something flickered inside me, a promise, or maybe just the residue of hope. I wrote. I turned down invitations, ignored laughter, missed out on birthday cakes and afternoons at the pitch. I woke early, scribbling before the air filled with voices. Manuscript by manuscript, I sent my work out, first to the big names, then the small ones, then anyone with a website and an email address. Nothing came back but polite rejections and sometimes silence. Still I wrote. Long walks at night became my secret respite. The city at night was raw and honest, orange sodium lamps pouring over battered taxis, children playing late, lovers arguing in hushes and shouts. Years crawled by. The laughter and the doubts from my family didn't stop but became less pointed, more tired. Questions about real jobs replaced the jabs. My mother aged before my eyes. When her hospital bills grew too much, I sold an old phone and stopped buying new books. The world, it seemed, had moved on without me. I wrote anyway. Then, 3 years and 96 rejections later, my inbox chimed with a new message. I recognized the publisher's name from my spreadsheet, a small but respected South African house. The email was simple: Dear Nomsa, we've read your manuscript, Broken Fence. We would be honored to publish it. I sat frozen, the old desktop whirring, the message burning against my skin. My hands shook so badly I almost called my mother to the room. I forced myself to breathe, to reread the email, tasting the words as if they were honey. Ma, I called loud enough to bring her running in her threadbare slippers. I thrust the screen at her, unable to find words. She frowned at first, then her lips parted. A tear streaked her cheek before she could speak. 6 months later, after endless copy edits, phone calls, contract negotiations, and a first deposit that let me pay the bills, my novel arrived in neat cardboard boxes. I opened one, breath catching at the sight of my name splayed on the cover above the title. I was invited to a book launch at a small shop in Rosebank. I wore the only decent dress I owned and borrowed my neighbor's bright scarf as a sash. My mother straightened my collar. Hold your head high, daughter, she whispered. The shop buzzed with unfamiliar voices, curious readers, reviewers, even a local journalist. My words were quoted on a placard next to the door. I stood by a table, Sharpie in hand, eyes shining. When I read aloud, my voice trembled only at the parts that mattered, and people listened. Gold earrings glinted, cameras flashed, and I realized this for once was about me. The reviews came. The book did not become a sensation overnight, but it sold, and it spoke to those who needed it. Young women visited my table, voice trembling as they said, "Thank you." My mother cut out every mention in the newspaper, taped them to the fridge. The money trickled in slow. I took more shifts, but I kept writing, sending stories out, carving truth from pain. I received an invitation from the Johannesburg Literary Festival 2 years later, a reading and a keynote slot. I bought my mother a new dress, the fabric bright and twinkling. We rode a taxi together to the venue, somewhere posh, glass reflecting the winter sky. In the foyer, SBU lingered behind my uncle, hands deep in his pockets. I nodded but felt no need to approach. I was on the list tonight, featured prominently on the program. Strangers recognized me, asked me to sign slips of paper. The auditorium was 100 times the size of my failed investor pitch. I watched the audience from the wings, journalists, students, professors, and a scattering of faces I recognized from the old neighborhood. The organizer rapped the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Nomsa Dlamini, author of Broken Fence, winner of last year's Urban Voices Award." Applause filled the room, soft at first but swelling as I mounted the steps. I took my place behind the podium, the lights warmer than I remembered. I searched the shadows and saw my mother, upright and glowing, framed by my uncle on one side and SBU on the other. My uncle's chin lifted. His jaw worked as though chewing on some bitterness. SBU kept looking away, but he was there. I took out a hardcover of Broken Fence, laying it on the podium. The title shone under the spot. "My story," I said, "began just like so many others in a crowded house in Alex, dreaming against the odds. Some called it ridiculous, said stories were for the lucky or the foolish. Small laughter rippled. I read from my book, the chapter where the main character wins her first battle, the one based on my own hope after years of darkness. My voice steadied as I spoke. I heard my mother sniffle, caught sight of Esbu's friend nudging him, whispering in awe. When the reading ended, the applause was thunderous. People queued for signings. My uncle approached last, shoulders hunched. "You did it, Nomsa," he said, his voice rough. "We were wrong, I was wrong." His words landed like bombs. SBU shuffled behind, eyes down. I signed his book with a flourish, and as he took it, he met my gaze. "Sorry," he whispered. "I didn't get it then, but it's real now." The proof was there, concrete and impossible to deny. My mother's arm looped with mine, and for a moment anger gave way to something quiet and forgiving. On the drive home that night, I felt a serenity I'd never known. The city lights stitched gold over the darkness, and in them I saw the outline of all my lost years, the struggle, the hunger, the rejection, twined together into a story I wouldn't trade for anything. Back on our street, kids were kicking a ball by the corner, laughter pealing as we stepped from the taxi. My mother leaned into me. "You coming home now, Nomsa?" I smiled. "Home, Ma. To write again." The world was not all kindness or applause. There would be new doubts, more struggle, but inside me was a peace. The anger cooled, transformed. I had done the impossible and come home changed but whole. And the city, merciless and beautiful, waited for the next chapter.